Hi everyone, Thread and Crown Cosplay here, and after months of trying to get back into cosplaying, League of Legends released an event called Star Guardians and inspiration struck. There were so many beautiful designs that I fell in love with, from Oriana's ballerina design with Tucker as her companion, Senna's colorful outfit and cannon that does massive damage, to Akali's sleek duds and matching weapons that didn't have too many leaks until recently. However, when I saw Redeemed Star Guardian Xayah and went through a massive gaming addiction to see how her story unfolded, I knew she was the one that I wanted to cosplay. So with newfound motivation and a plethora of fabrics that were in need of use, let's begin the process. To make the skirt, I started out by measuring my waist and how long I wanted the longest part to be, getting two measurements of 30 inches and 14 inches. Using a shiny performance material from my inventory that I folded in half, cut, and sewn together to get the length to almost double my waist measurement, I marked out my second measurement across it and cut off the excess fabric. After setting the excess fabric to the side, I started pleating my skirt by using my measuring tape as a guide. It took a few attempts to get them right, but on the third try I was successful and got the long length of fabric down to my waist measurement. For the waistband, I cut out an 1.5 inch thick by 30-inch length of sturdy fabric and excessively pinned the pleated skirt onto it before sewing them together. Since it was going to be hidden under the bodice, I wasn't going to worry too much about how neat the waistband was going to be, and continued making the skirt by pinning a diagonal line across the bottom of it and carefully cutting off the excess fabric. Once I tried the skirt on and saw that I didn't need to do any tweaking, I laid my skirt onto several taped together pieces of paper and drew out the detailing first with a pencil and then finalized it with a Sharpie. The ruler was my best friend during this process to make sure that the triangles and the bottom portion of the trim were going to be even all the way around. It took a few attempts, as I originally was going to have each triangle be 3 inches away from each other, but I decided that they were too far away from one another and reduced it down to 2 inches. As soon as my pattern was created, I separated the template into 5 manageable pieces, marked them out onto an emerald holographic adhesive vinyl, and carefully cut each piece out. Once all 5 pieces were cut out, I carefully stuck the vinyl onto the skirt before folding the raw edges inward and ironing them out to ensure that the details were permanently adhered to the skirt. The final steps that I did for the skirt was sewing together the open ends with the right sides of the fabrics facing each other and adding a snap button to where the waistband overlapped. And this is the finished piece. I love how shiny it is and that I don't have to worry about it slipping all over the place. To make the bodice, I got some help from my husband and made a saran wrap and duct tape pattern on my body before marking out where each part of the top laid on me. After I was cut free for the saran wrap and duct tape burrito, I laid out a length of muslin fabric that was folded in half long ways and placed a template on top of it, marking around it with a Sharpie before cutting it out and trying it on. Since I knew that the final fabric I was going to use had some stretch, I didn't have to worry about the muslin fitting 100% on me so long as everything landed where I wanted it to be. And happy with the fit, I transferred the full piece onto a piece of paper and repeated the same step with all of the smaller bodice pieces. Starting with the upper part of the bodice, I pinned the upper front panel and breast cup base onto a folded piece of white stretch knit and the upper back panel on the same pink fabric that I used for my skirt before cutting them out, pinning them together, and sewing them together with a straight stitch. I repeated these steps with the front center panel and all of the other panels that made the bottom half of the bodice's top layer. There were a lot of pieces, and I kind of jumped around until everything was put together. For the breast cup, I pinned the smaller 3 panels on top of the breast cup base, making sure that no raw edges were visible before carefully sewing those together and cutting off the excess fabric. When those were done, I pinned and sewed those together to get this outcome. To make the green lower back panel, I copied the paper pattern onto a folded length of white stretch knit before duplicating the paper template twice onto holographic adhesive green vinyl and ironed them together. Seeing that nasty edge in the center, I folded the back panels with the right sides facing each other and sewed a straight stitch through the layers. I also made the stomacher with a thin layer of craft foam and dark teal stretch velvet before pinning it at the bottom of the breast cups and sewing it on. With the stomacher attached and the top layer of the bodice almost done, I pinned where the lower half and upper half of the bodice fitted together and sewed. I also made a lining layer with just the right stretch knit fabric and sewed it into the top layer. And this is what the bodice looks like so far. Pretty neat, but there's still more work to be done. like the gold trim. For the gold trim that goes around the perimeter of Xayah's bodice, I began with various paper templates that I transferred onto very thin craft foam, and using a golden stretch performance fabric, I glued the foam pieces on using super glue. Though I was happy with how some of the trim turned out, some of the other trim pieces I was not thrilled about, and I decided to redo this part with a golden fabric that did not have as much stretch and had this somewhat crushed hammer appeal to it. Much happier with this choice of fabric, I repeated the whole process from transferring the paper templates to thin craft foam, cutting out all of the pieces, gluing them onto the fabric with hot glue, to cutting off the excess fabric, notching the little cuts to make the fabric easier to adhere to the foam, and gluing the raw edges on the back sides of the foam. I considered sewing the trim with gold thread, but decided against it and began gluing together the edges onto the bodice, beginning with the side panels that were cut out from a layer of right stretch knit and layering whatever raw edges that were on the trim onto the right fabric. I also did this with most of the gold trim that was meant to go on the bodice and used the same gold material to sew around the armholes to get this. Overall, the bodice is coming out a lot better than I expected, but we are still not done yet. Since I did not sew the side panels on yet, I did that and added a thin craft foam layer that matched the side panels before continuing my hot glue mania by adding the details beneath the bust. This was when I realized I had a little bit of a difficult time getting in and out of the bodice, so it was time to alter the bodice from being a pullover to having a back opening. To resolve that problem, I made a small oddly shaped panel that I attached onto the top back portion of the bodice that is split open and added 4 small snap buttons for secure closure. The last step that I did for the bodice was add on a few golden covered foam details at the front bottom tips and the back tail. And this is the bodice! On to the next part. To make the stockings, I used a pair of everyday leggings and folded them over a length of rolled out paper and marked the shape out with a pencil. After removing the leggings, I sketched out the design and went over it with a Sharpie and began cutting it out. Halfway through cutting out the template, I noticed that I drew on the wrong design for the stocking, and fixed that issue before cutting out the remaining shapes to get this pattern. Using the same white stretch knit fabric that I used for my bodice, I folded it in half and began pinning those select paper patterns down, making sure that whatever had to be one continuous piece was on the fold to get the shapes that I wanted. I also did this step with the gold trim, the pink shorts, and the dark teal diamonds. With all the pieces cut out and the templates removed, I started piecing the stockings from the bottom up, piece by piece by piece, until I got to the dark teal diamond. I also sewed the shorts together and set those to the side. Since I did not want the stockings to slide down, I used 2 layers of see-through skin color stretch fabric for each leg and used a paper template that matched the colored portion of the stockings to cut off the excess. Once the extra fabric was removed, I pinned the edges of the sheer mesh fabric onto one another before sewing up a straight stitch and pinned the stockings to the mesh to get this. Happy with the stockings and the shorts, I pinned them together with the right sides facing each other, making sure that both fabrics evenly stretched out before sewing them together. The last step that I did for the stockings was hemming the raw edge of the short down. And these are the stockings. I wish I could say that they were quick and easy to do, but the mesh portion of them was probably the most difficult part and I had to do it a few times before getting it right. To make the gloves, I rolled out a long sheet of paper and sketched my hand on top of it before adding an extra ½ inch from the middle of my palm down to the elbow and cut the paper pattern out. On a length of white stretch knit that I folded into quarters, I pinned the paper template down and cut around the perimeter before pinning the edges together and sewing them down with a straight stitch. Once I removed the pin and turned the gloves right side out, I cut out 4 long strips of shiny pink performance fabric and carefully pinned around the perimeter of the top and bottom openings with the raw edges facing inward and sewed those together. And this was the outcome! Super stretchy, and the gold thread adds a nice little touch, but we're missing the elbow guards. To make those, I made a paper template that I broke down into separate pieces and transferred them onto the corresponding fabric and onto thin craft foam. Then it was a matter of sticking everything together piece by piece by piece by piece until I had this design. I also made 2 backings using golden fabric and glued those onto the back of the elbow guards. The last step that I did for the gloves was that I stretched them over a bottle and carefully glued the elbow guards to the outermost part of the glove's top. And here are the gloves. It takes a little bit of time getting used to just having the pinky finger covered, but they are super comfortable and the guards do not bother me in terms of movement. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you want to see more content like this, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in part 2. Bye!